So what exactly is a time freeze counter? You may have played all the Battle Network games, but if you've never played PvP, you may not have ever heard this term. Well, a time freeze counter, or a TFC, is the foundation of PvP. It's a mechanic you only find when you're playing against a real person. But before we dive deep into why time freeze counters are so important, let's take a look at what a time freeze chip is. Most of the chips you use in BN6 are fired in real time, but a good amount of them will turn the screen dark, say their name, and then do an effect. In this mode, your opponents can't move around, so if you chose the right chip in the right position, it's guaranteed to hit, right? Well, not entirely. If you're playing against a real person and you also have a time freeze chip, you can actually respond by cutting in first. That means that the last person will actually use their chip first, and that can often mean that the first person's strategy is completely ruined. Think about it. In our earlier folder video, we talked a lot about the importance of invis and anti-damage. These are defensive chips, but they also stop time. That means if your opponent uses a powerful Giga chip and you have your invis ready to go, you can completely stop them from doing it and get a huge advantage. In a lot of ways, TFCs are kind of like the stack from Magic the Gathering, but it's a lot more stressful. That's because your reaction time is key. You have to use your chip while the opponent's chip name is being displayed, which means you have about a second or so to process what your opponent is using and decide whether or not it's worth countering. Now, for the most part, this doesn't matter too much, and I'll get into that in just a bit, but it is something important to think about. I have a pretty bad habit of just snap countering every single chip that I see. It's something I'm working on because that's not always the play. But hey, here's 4 other important things you should know about time freeze counters. The first is you can go absolutely nuts with counters. You can counter their counter, and they can counter that counter you countered. However, all the earlier chips used by both players will disappear, and only the final 2 will work. The second is you can always respond to your opponent's time freeze chip, even if you're stunned or frozen or whatever. This means that real-time chips are a lot better to punish foes in a tough position, because otherwise you might give them the opportunity to use an invis. The third is anti-navi is technically a time freeze counter. That means you should be extra careful using it, or you might lose a valuable chip. To paint a picture, let's say your anti-navi is active and you use Life Aura, but then your opponent responds with a navi chip. Your anti-navi triggers in response, so while you steal the opponent's chip, you also lose your first precious chip. Then finally, there's Beat and Rush. These are Navi customizer programs that only work in PvP and disrupt your opponent for using certain chips. However, neither one of them will trigger if your opponent TFCs you. If you fight a careful and patient foe, your cute little animals might not work at all. And that's really the main takeaway of this video. Patience is key. If you have a powerful time freeze chip, you're better off waiting for your opponent to blink first. That way, even if they respond back to the initial one with a bit of defense, they're going to have to throw away a chip in the process. This becomes even more important if you're using chips like invis or anti-damage. I oftentimes see new players just jamming those chips at the start of a round, and while that's okay, those chips are at their best potential when they're completely nullifying an opponent's attack and catching them off guard. There's actually a lot more to say about TFCs that becomes a bit more nuanced, like sequencing your chips in a round, but we'll save that for a future video. In short, time freeze counters are the glue that holds a fair and balanced format together. It's the reason why older Battle Network games like BN2 just aren't really that competitive. It's so hard to balance around a metagame where you're just mashing the A button as fast as you can to get your time freeze counter before the opponent's. If you're not as interested in BN6 PvP, but you want to try your hand at some other formats, try Battle Network 4 or 5. These also have time freeze counters, and you'd be amazed what a difference they make. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, please know that we make a whole bunch of other videos that are very new player friendly. We also stream every day on Twitch. I hope you'll consider checking us out, and please look forward to the Rental Rumble. We have some exciting new news about this tournament that we're going to be doing in May, and it is very, very new player friendly. Can't wait to see you there, Net Battlers, and catch you later.